702.
The Naked Scientist.
Time for The Naked Scientist with Dr. Chris Smith. Your science-related questions on 011 883 702, the WhatsApp line 072 702 702. Doctor, I'm going to jump straight into asking, and I hope you had a great weekend, if when animals are hunted, do they, I don't want to say do they feel pain, but do they feel trauma as if a human was being hunted?
We've got to be really careful here, Lebo, and happy Monday to you as well and all the listeners. The answer to this is that we humans experience things the way humans do. We have not got an animal's brain, and animals do not have our brains. So we've got to be really cautious about anthropomorphizing this. When we see cartoons about rabbits and things and we give them human characteristics. When we anthropomorphize, you basically inflict humanness on other things, whether that's animals or objects.
Yes.
And when Beatrix Potter tells the story of Peter Rabbit and so on, and we see a rabbit dressed up in a nice blue waistcoat and it's got thoughts and feelings and all that kind of thing. This doesn't happen in the same way. You've got to be really careful about how you attribute the way we humans think to the way animals think. That said, animals' brains are very, very similar to ours, often, and they're wired up in a very similar way to ours, which is why we may take a mouse and do an experiment on a mouse and conclude that it tells us something about how humans work. Many of our traits are reflected in animals. So it's perfectly reasonable to say, well, I think animals probably can feel fear. They certainly show all of the same emotions, the same hormonal responses, the same neurological responses that a frightened human shows. When you put them in a situation that's foreign to them or potentially life-threatening, a predator is coming, they smell something that would normally to them signal, hey, I might be in danger, better get out of here. So I think it's probably realistic to say, yes, that animals do experience fear. Do they experience pain? Well, absolutely, because they have the same pain pathways that we do. They have the same responses to pain that humans do. So therefore, they probably find things unpleasant just like we do. But do they have a sense of mortality? Do they have a sense that if this happens, I'm going to die, I won't see my mum and dad again, I won't see my brother and sister, I won't be able to do all those things I've got planned for the rest of my life? There we think that probably things are a bit different. We don't think animals necessarily have the same idea, not across the board anyway, of time passing, of mortality and their own vulnerability in that respect. So we think, and perhaps that's an oversimplification, but we think that animals don't have that same planning for the future insight that humans do, although some might. And some birds are very, very clever, and they definitely have the ability to read the future. But do they see themselves and their own vulnerability as part of that future, or is it just a reflex? We don't know, and we can't ask them. Therefore, we find it very, very hard to do anything other than speculate about those sorts of things. So you've got to be really careful about inflicting human emotions on animals, but certainly many of the things we feel and do and see and experience, animals are going to have exactly the same reaction.
Learned a new word, anthropomorphizing. So giving objects, animals, or abstract concepts human-like or non-human things, human traits. And I think maybe I've been watching way too children's animations. I've got the one I watched recently is called The Good Dinosaur, and his family, he gets lost. So I think you're right. Sometimes we're watching way too many animations and we literally impose our humanness onto animals. I definitely never thought of it that way. Peter in Sandton, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Lebohile and Chris. Chris, it's winter here in South Africa, and it's it's a season for cold and flu, and we've been inundated with medication. They're claiming that they boost your immune system. If you take this, then your immune system is going to be whatever, and you're unlikely to suffer from cold and flu. How far true are these claims?
Hi, Peter. You're absolutely right to be sceptical because many of them are groundless and baseless. There is the obvious and absolutely true claim that an undernourished person is an unhealthy person with a poorer immune system. That's absolutely true because for your immune system to work properly, it has to have enough energy and it's got to have all of the right micronutrients and vitamins and minerals that you need to be healthy because it can't function in an agile way if it's not. So if you're debilitated, yes, you are absolutely more vulnerable. But a person who can afford to pay for these sorts of supplements, can afford to eat a healthy diet, and that is what food is for. You don't need these supplements. just eat a healthy diet. They're ripping you off, a lot of these things. As some cynics say, these vitamin pills and these other supplements, they're just a way of making expensive urine, because you basically get as much as you'll get from those packets of vitamins out of a healthy diet. There are some exceptions. There are some people who have defined deficiencies. Women are more vulnerable to anemia, where they don't have enough iron. Therefore, for certain reasons, at certain times of their life, women may need to fortify their diet with more iron. That's absolutely reasonable. Similarly, women who are going to get pregnant or think they might be going to get pregnant should increase the amount of folic acid in their diet. That's one of the B vitamins, because a developing fetus needs a lot of B vitamins to grow lots of cells fast to make the nervous system, and you can have things like spina bifida if you're deficient. But for the majority of the situations, you are not going to become suddenly free from flu and colds and viruses because you took this supplement. These supplements just make your body ideally healthy, but you can do exactly the same thing with a healthy diet. So I would save your money, spend what you would spend instead of buying exorbitantly overpriced supplements. Buy a decent diet, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, eat plenty of it, lots of roughage, reasonable amount of protein, not too much fat and salt, and you will go just as far as if you spent the money on that packet of pills, and you'll really enjoy eating them. Not the pills, the food, rather than the packet of supplements.
Thank you so much, Peter in Stanton, for that question. Sharon in Cape Town. Go ahead, Sharon.
Good afternoon, Rebecca.
Yes.
My question for the naked scientist is, what does the research say about the effect of the devices on the hands, especially the shape of the hands, of Gen Z and Gen Alpha? Because I've just noticed something. Some of these kids have got such long fingers. They're almost borderline Marfan. They're having like Marfan syndrome because they're so long. I mean, all the devices, because they're moving between cell phones, game controllers, keyboards, because they're like on games and everything. Surely that must be having an effect on these hands, because these hands they don't do the manual work like we did. They're just on devices all the time. So is this Marfan long hands part of that mutation?
Oh, nice one, Sharon, in Cape Town. And just to add, Doctor, I also have seen something called headphone head. So for people that sit with headphones on the whole day, they have that dent.
Lebo, you've got
funny,
headphones
so
on right now.
scary.
I'm looking at your picture, I'm looking at you, and you've got your headphones on. So have I. So have you got headphone head? Because it's sort of squidged your head in from the side.
I don't have headphone head, but I might in a few years' time. I think it's those gamers that sit with headphones on the whole day.
No, I completely agree. But where devices are concerned, first of all, let's put to the one side this whole question about one thing that Sharon mentioned, which is Marfan's. Marfan's syndrome is an inherited trait where you have a change in a gene that codes for the way you make some of the connective tissues in your body. And it produces a very characteristic body shape. It's called a Marfanoid habitus. And people tend to have longer arms. They have very long fingers and toes. It's called arachnodactyly because of spideriness, long fingers. And also in the mouth, the palate has a very high arch to it. And Abraham Lincoln is said, based on what we know about him in his shape and proportion, was said to also have had Marfan's. So it's a particular shape which of the anatomy. You wouldn't get that by just using a mobile phone too much. It's not like we're selecting for people who have Marfans in the population. Mobile phones have not been around for long enough, and nor have game controllers, for us to have had a demonstrable selective pressure on the population to make Marfans suddenly become a lot more common because the longer fingers make you better at playing games. I don't think that's the case. But I thought where Sharon might go with this is that certainly we're using our hands very differently. Using a mobile phone a lot or a game controller a lot can actually lead to repetitive strain injury, because you're putting your hand into a certain position, contorting your fingers around a device and gripping a device or like a tool effectively for a prolonged period of time, and then manipulating it with your fingers and thumbs. This may, in the long term, not lead to the kind of arthritis that a bricklayer or a labourer would get, but we may get arthritis in different joints, and we may get repetitive strain injuries because of damage to tendons and so on, because of repetitive use in an abnormal posture. So it might be we substitute one kind of occupational hazard for another one. But looking on the plus side, if people become very good at using and manipulating gadgets and devices, they tend to train quite fast reflexes. And if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, for example, in the war against Russia, this isn't a war so much being fought by humans, it's a war being fought by machines. Drones have never had such a front and centre high representation in warfare, where machines are actually taking the combat to the battlefield more than humans in many respects. Those drones are being controlled by people, and the people controlling them tend to also have very fast reflexes and be very, very good on computer games. So it may well be that one of the things we're doing is training people to be extremely good with their fingers, very versatile, very digitally versatile, and have extremely fast reflexes and reactions, which is, again, it's a skill. And so it may well be that will come in very handy in the future in manipulating fine control as we move into an era where we're using robots and other devices more to do things so humans don't have to. So yes, there are probably going to be pros and cons of all this, but selecting for Marfans is probably not one of them.
All right. Thank you so much for that question. We have got a voice note.
Good afternoon, 702 and all its listeners. To the naked scientist, I would like to ask this. The electrical pylons that are scattered all over the country transporting electricity to the different locations. I sometimes see birds standing on the wires on top there, but I do assume that if it were a person who would be standing there, sitting there like the birds, he would be electrocuted. How come are the birds not electrocuted, sir?
Nice one.
What a terrific radio voice as well. It's very therapeutic, very soothing voice, isn't it? I like that one. Ooh. The answer to this is it wouldn't matter if it was a human or a bird sitting on the wire, although please don't climb electricity pylons. You wouldn't be electrocuted. Because if the bird's okay, you would be okay if, and this is a really big if, you don't complete the circuit. The reason the bird, or the human for that matter, sitting on a wire would be absolutely fine is because the wire is at a certain potential, it has a certain amount of voltage, and the electricity wants to go from an area of high potential to an area of low potential. So a live wire has high electrical potential and the neutral wire has low electrical potential, and the electricity wants to go between the two. If you're just on one of those wires, probably the live one, because we tend to have more live conductors than a single neutral line, then you will be at high potential, but you're just basically adding some charge to your body, and once you've turned yourself into a giant capacitor, it won't go any further. If you reach out and you touch the pylon, or you touch the neutral line, both of which are effectively earth, you have now completed the circuit, and you are offering the electricity in the live line a route from a high potential to a low potential earth. You become a human conductor. The current through you will be absolutely huge, and you will catch fire and be dead in a fraction of a second. So the birds, because they're only sitting on one conductor, they are not completing the circuit, therefore there is no current flow through their body, apart from a tiny amount of loss to the air around the bird's body, so there's a tiny current flowing in. They won't even notice, you wouldn't notice, but if you completed the circuit, you absolutely would.
Do not take the risk, guys. Just don't do it. Thank you so much for that one. Sammy in Centurion, go ahead.
Good the scientist. I'd like to ask the latest scientist, why is it that the nations at the north are more innovative and more industrious than the ones in the south? You look at China, Russia, USA, Britain, and so on. They are more innovative than the ones in the south, like in Africa and so on. Does that have to do with the climatic conditions that they experience and that ingrained a spirit of innovation in them? What is it exactly?
Sammy, that's an interesting one because, funny enough, I don't consider the Northern Hemisphere more innovative, but maybe you can help out here, Dr. Chris Smith, because I almost feel like a lot of the innovations we see were invented in Africa. They were just not credited accordingly.
I don't know if there's evidence that's true, Lebo, but what I do know is that obviously this is a really, really hard question to answer, because are we dealing with people having ingenious ideas and no potential to realise them? And that's kind of what you're hinting at? Or is it that there's something fundamentally different between how people tended to live and work and exist in the Southern Hemisphere compared to in the Northern Hemisphere? Is it that the Northern Hemisphere wasn't such an easy ride to live in at certain points than in the Southern Hemisphere, and therefore it's selected for people having to be more creative to live there and to escape Africa, and therefore once that selection process started, it reinforced itself in a self-fulfilling way? Or is the flip true, that life in Africa, you had to live by your wits? If you think about our ancestors tens of thousands of years ago, everything was trying to eat you. There weren't huge numbers of people around who could defend you. There were groups of people, but not huge numbers. People had to be pretty ingenious to survive, but a lot of their effort went on survival, and the land was pretty nice and was otherwise fairly forgiving for people as long as you could survive and not turn into something's lunch. So which of these arguments is it? Is it that it was hard in Europe or in the northern climes, therefore it selected for people ingenuity and got people thinking outside the box, and that then carried on? Or was it just tough to do that in Africa because your time and attention was going on other things and keeping yourself from being lunch? Or was it harsh in Africa and therefore people actually put their energies in other directions? I don't think we actually know. What we do have in terms of archaeological timeline, there's a really good story came out a couple of weeks ago. I actually interviewed the guy who found that Neanderthals about 125,000 years ago had built a fat factory in Germany in the site of what's now an open cast coal mine. They found tens of thousands of bone shards there where the Neanderthals were catching things, smashing up the bone and then boiling up the bones to get the fat out so that they could use the fat as a source of nutrition, but also for other things that we do with fat. So in other words, they had to be quite ingenious to work out how to survive in what was a pretty harsh environment. So maybe that's part of it. And the reason anatomically modern humans didn't leave Africa until maybe 50, 60,000 years ago is because every time we tried, we failed. And we eventually got ingenious enough and began working together enough to get us out of the African continent. So perhaps it is a selection process. There was a test getting into the north where it's harder to live, and that put people on that path. But I tell you what, I'm going to take this question away and have a think about it and talk about it some more with some of my much more expert colleagues. So I think it's a fascinating question. It'll make a really good thing for us to talk about next week.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chris Smith. We'll leave it there till Monday.
Time to review my favorite employee, my FNB Gold business account. You give me thousands of potential customers by listing my business